Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. We have now arrived at 1997, which was one of the weaker years for Asian horror, unfortunately, especially when compared to some of the last few years that we've covered. With that said, however, 1997 did contribute at least one all-time classic. We'll get to that one later, but first we need to slug through some rancid stink piles. And remember, all of the films I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So we begin with the worst Asian horror film from 1997. And I would have to say that that is Troublesome Night, a Hong Kong horror comedy anthology. Now this is the first film that spawned a long-running franchise, a very long-running franchise, that ultimately accumulated 19 installments. That's even more than the Shake, Rattle, and Roll series. Yes, you heard that correctly. If you thought there were too many Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movies, you haven't seen anything yet. The Troublesome Night franchise has been thoroughly run into the ground and beaten like a dead horse. With that said, however, there are a few good entries that we will eventually cover, but this first installment is very bad. So this is an anthology of 4 short films. The first story is about a group of friends who hang out in a cemetery. So the plot goes something like this. I'm dead. Just kidding, I'm alive. Oh wait, I'm really dead. Haha, fooled you, I'm actually alive. It's completely idiotic. Like, that's the entire short film. It's just some dude, I think it's a dude who just goes back and forth. He's dead, no he's alive, no he's dead, no he's alive. And it's just really badly written stuff. Something like a high school kid might write. So it's very annoying to say the least. Probably the worst short film in this anthology. So let me just quickly summarize the plot lines of the remaining segments, and then I'll give my overall thoughts on those. Really had to kind of segregate that first one because it's so bad. Now the second story is about a guy who gets into an accident on his way home. Then weird stuff happens. The third story is about a woman who gets seduced by a ghost. And the fourth story is about a couple who go to the cinema but experience ghostly phenomena. So overall, this first Troublesome Night installment is a very weak effort, with lame humor and very little in terms of entertainment value. Those qualities are duplicated and pop up numerous times during this series, during the weaker installments. There are some good ones though, like I said, and I'll explain why they're good when we get to them. In this first installment too, there's almost no atmosphere at all, which is a big negative for me, because if you're going to have a weak script and just all around low-level filmmaking quality, at least give me some atmosphere to keep me engaged with the proceedings, but it doesn't even give you that. Now, some of the sequels use some bright blue lighting, which I was actually kind of a fan of. There are a few other Hong Kong films that use kind of this odd, bright blue lighting when the ghosts show up, which I kind of like, but this installment does not use that, so that kind of lends to the lack of atmosphere that you might find in some of these other installments. So you gotta skip this first installment. And don't worry about skipping around in this franchise. In fact, I think you should skip around, because if you sit down and try to watch all of these, you're in for some real pain. I think I've sat through 10 of these so far, and I think I enjoyed maybe 4 of them. We'll get to those, but I would say that if you're interested in getting into this franchise, you might want to wait until I actually recommend a few of the installments. Watch those first, and then if you like those, then maybe try some of the other ones that maybe I didn't like, and maybe you'll like them more than me. So that's Troublesome Night Part 1 for you. And actually, they're not really parts, because each of these films is completely separate from one another, so you can watch them in any order, too, so you don't have to worry about getting lost in a grand storyline or anything, so don't worry about that. Alright, next. A film that's not much better, and it's also from Hong Kong, unfortunately, and that is Midnight Zone, a Hong Kong horror comedy anthology. Again, you see a theme here? So this is an anthology of 3 short films. The first story involves a slacker cop who has been assigned to guard a crime scene overnight, but a missing severed head complicates matters. The second story is about a married couple who get into a hit-and-run accident. Then weird stuff happens. The third story is about a man, played by Anthony Wong, and his family who get haunted by their grandmother because apparently she has some gripes with their relationship as it developed while she was alive. So the overall quality here is typical of some of the weaker Hong Kong horror comedies, which means that you should avoid it. It really fails miserably at both eliciting laughs and scares from the viewer, which is a real problem for a horror comedy. So, it just, when you watch this film, it gives you the impression of very lazy filmmaking overall. Almost like no effort was made into crafting this. Kind of like it was just thrown together, you know? And surprisingly, Wilson Yip directed this. Now, this man is the same guy who brought us some of those excellent action films from recent memory, such as the Ip Man trilogy, Killzone, etc. But this was still very early on in his career, and maybe he just didn't find his rhythm yet as a filmmaker, because the overall quality of this one is way lower than some of his other future entries in other genres. So I'd say skip Midnight Zone. You probably never heard of it, and you can probably guess why. All right, next we move to Japan for another pretty poor entry here, and that is Kokkuri, Japanese horror film. Now, a group of friends play a Japanese game to summon Kokkuri-san, a spirit who can answer any question, but apparently reveals dark secrets that will make the players turn against each other. So, this is one of those movies that tosses in really boring conversations that fill up much of the runtime. There are a few decent backdrops and camera shots, but there is almost no scariness, and this film's perpetual dullness make it a must-miss in my book. If you're not going to scare me, you better give me some good story and characters, and this film does not do that. Now, Kokkuri was directed by a man named Takahisa Zeze, who has a fairly large number of exploitation films under his belt. I think Jasper Sharp, in his book, I believe it's called Beyond the Pink Curtain, I think it's called. I recommended it in a previous video. In that book, Jasper Sharp, I think, mentions this director as part of the, I guess, Big Four Devils or whatnot of exploitation film in Japan. So this guy has a little bit of a reputation that precedes him. Now, I researched the names of some of his other films just for fun, and they all seem to be far more fun than Kokkuri. For example, here are a few titles that I found in Zeze's filmography. Indecent Tongue Technique, Molester's Train, Rie's Fundoshi Underwear, Obscene Runaway Gang Beast, Amazon Garden Uniform Lesbians, Widow, Bliss on the Seventh Day of Mourning, and the apparent related film Widow, Bliss in a Morning Dress, Endless Sex, Genuine Lesbian, Embarrassing Position, and High Class Bathhouse Sex Technique, Blissful Secret Act. How about that for a filmography? I almost wish that some of these films were infused into Kokkuri, just to make it more memorable. But in all fairness, Zeze has made some legitimately good stuff. I'm a fan of his film A Gap in the Skin, as well as Raigyo, also known as Woman with Black Underwear, Snake-Headed Fish. It sounds weird, but it's a pretty good flick. Both of those films are far more interesting than Kokkuri. This film just comes off as, man, I can't really say lazy, just real generic and forgettable. So I'll skip this one. Alright, our next film, which is another underwhelming film. We're not even up to the mediocre films yet. We're not even up to mediocre yet. We're still in the crap piles. And this one is actually more offensive than the previous films we've covered. Much more offensive. And that is Juvenile Crime, also known as Shonen no Hanzai, Japanese exploitation horror film. Now, this is another film that is based on the true story of a 16-year-old high school girl who was abducted, tortured, raped, and murdered during 44 days of captivity. Now, we already discussed a film in a previous video that was based on the same event, and that film was called Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case from 1995, which I actually recommended because it had its positive qualities. So, does Juvenile Crime continue that trend of at least somewhat respecting this tragedy? No. No, it doesn't. In fact, I think this is an example of a movie that just blatantly exploits the demise of a real-life person, because it's severely lacking in filmmaking quality. If you're going to make a film like this based on this type of material, you have to take it seriously and put some effort into it. Otherwise, it just comes off as purely exploitative. Now, this film, Juvenile Crime, is very mean-spirited and lacking in the emotional components that helped the concrete encased high school girl murder case to rise above being simple exploitation. Now, of the 3 films that I've seen that are based on this event, Juvenile Crime is definitely the worst of the lot. There is no reason to see this one. So, we're going to cover the 3rd film a little bit later on in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist, which is kind of in the middle. I would have to say the concrete encased high school girl murder case is the one to watch. If you're willing to watch a film based on this event, skip Juvenile Crime, and we'll get to the other one later. So I do not recommend Juvenile Crime. All right, next film here. I think we're at kind of the mediocre flicks now. Okay, so and this is the 6th installment of the Shake, Rattle, and Roll franchise. That's Shake, Rattle, and Roll 6, Filipino horror anthology. Now, this film series contributes yet another lackluster anthology comprised of 3 short stories. The premise of the first story, Ang Telebisyon, is as follows. With her parents always fighting, a neglected child is stalked by an evil clown that appears on her television set. This is a pretty good concept now, but the execution is very amateurish. The clown is very cheesy, and the resolution of the threat is so easy and brief that it comes off as incredibly lazy script writing. One of the most pathetic anticlimaxes you can imagine. I remember when I watched this, and the climax happens, and the conflict is resolved, and I just sat there like, really? Seriously? Like, that's the finale to this story? Not good. So in the second short story, Ang Tale, the ghost of a boy haunts the main bridge leading out of town, luring motorists into accidents. Now, 3 girls try to put the boy's soul to rest. This story has a few decent scenes of atmosphere, but ultimately it's very dull and forgettable. So it's not as, I guess annoying as the first segment, but it's just, there's no reason to watch this. The third story is Ang Buwan, and it's about a college girl who transforms into a monster during the full moon and murders people during that time. Now, the horror scenes are frustrating in their brevity in this segment, and their overall quality is mediocre. I mean, this premise is pretty commonplace, transforming into a monster at night and ravaging the local town or village. But, you're hoping that there might be some cool scenes, maybe some lengthy attack sequences or real atmospheric scares, but this story just doesn't bring that. It doesn't contribute that at all. And again, the resolution of the conflict is way too easy and unsatisfying. I mean, some horror movies can get away with weak endings if a lot of the stuff before it was good and solid, but you can't have a weak ending after everything before it was weak. It's just, it does not work. There's also some dull filler to sit through in this one. So, subsequent to this installment, Shake, Rattle, and Roll, where are we at? 6? Yeah. After the 6th installment of this franchise, the series thankfully went into hibernation for about 8 years, but was subsequently resurrected as Part 7 in 2005. So, we're unfortunately going to get to the next installment when we hit 2005. But thankfully, we can take a break from this underwhelming series of films. Man. Sometimes I wonder why I watch so many of them, But curiosity gets the best of you sometimes. All right, the next film is the last film that I disliked from this particular year for Asian horror. So we're about to get to the good stuff. This one, I'm almost kind of on the fence on, but I gotta come down as being non-recommendable, just due to all the flaws that it has. But this one is It's definitely memorable. I'll give it that much. You know, a lot of the previous films I covered, I keep saying they're not memorable, they're forgettable. This one is memorable, but kind of for the wrong reasons. And that is Kichiku Die Kai, also known as Banquet of the Beasts, Japanese exploitation horror film. Alright, now this film is loosely based on a real life notorious incident from 1972, where a small group of radical student revolutionaries turned on themselves while holed up in a woodland cavern. So first and foremost, the final 40 minutes of this movie has some of the most graphic, stomach-churning violence ever committed to film. A few of these deaths are almost unwatchable because they're so ghastly. And the gore effects are also just excellent in this. Really hard to sit through some of these scenes. And these scenes drag on and they last a while. So it's almost like, this isn't like some of those Friday the 13th films that were butchered by the MPAA. Or at least influenced to be butchered by MPAA ratings, where like you'll get like a brief second of violence and it cuts away. No. Kichiku Die Kai just shows you the violence and it just stays there. It sits on it for you to admire, I guess. But unfortunately, there is just so much dead weight during the opening hour, and even during some of the latter parts, that this movie is just a chore to sit through, man. It really is a chore. There's not much character development, and the interaction between the characters is executed in the most boring, shallow ways possible. There was a lot of potential here for portraying a gradually escalating conflict between these characters that kind of spirals out of control, and that's when the violence would hit. But none of that potential is really tapped, leaving a film that's completely devoid of tension, suspense, or interest. Even as an exploitation film, due to the violence, it could have worked better if edited down to a much shorter runtime. But that's not the case here. There's just too much dull stuff to sit through to get to the naughty bits. However, the violence here is so nasty and pronounced that if you're a gore hound, you may want to seek it out. Just, you might want to keep your finger on the fast forward button during the first hour. So, yeah, I cannot recommend this one. On a positive note, though, this director, Kazuyoshi Komakiri, would go on to make a number of impressive films, such as Antenna from 2004, Green Mind's Metal Bats from 2006, and The End of Summer from 2013. I'm actually a pretty big fan of this director, who's not well known, unbelievably. But this was, I think, his first film, and it just doesn't come through. Alright, so we finally reached the batch of Asian horror films from 1997 that I actually enjoyed. We're there. And the first film here is a pretty good one. It is called, believe it or not, Eat the Schoolgirls, Osaka Telephone Club, Japanese exploitation horror. Now in this film, a young man feels sexual satisfaction while murdering people. It's basically the premise of this one, pretty simplistic. But with a short runtime of about 60 minutes, it is very possible to hold the viewer's interest if the character interaction is engaging enough. And in this case, I think it is. This is not deep stuff here, so don't go in with that expectation, but the depravity is depicted in engaging ways, if you're into this kind of thing. There's a lot of nudity and sex as well, which gets rather tedious at times, but there are some pretty nasty, stomach-churning acts of graphic violence. Unfortunately, there are some bodily fluids that are also shown. I'm pretty sure they're fake, but still. It's a little grimy and disgusting. But, believe it or not, no schoolgirls are actually eaten at any point during this film, contrary to the title. I was a little disappointed in that. I was hoping somebody would eat a schoolgirl, but I don't know. We didn't get it here. But still, I still kind of like this one. It just has something to it that just kept me engaged enough to make it enjoyable. And to be honest, it's very difficult to make a case for this film because it's really aimed at a specific kind of viewer. But I still marginally recommend it for those who are in the mood for something sleazy and repulsive. But one thing I thought of while writing this up, the actual reviews up for this film and reviewing them was that I had to ask myself why exactly I'm recommending Eat the Schoolgirls, although marginally recommending, but I'm still recommending it. But I do not recommend Kichiku Die Kai, which I just covered, even though the violence is actually stronger in Kichiku Die Kai. And I had to think about it for a few minutes, and I really think that the runtime is the big reason. Eat the Schoolgirls, like I said, was 60 minutes long, while Kichiku was over 100 minutes long, and most of which consisted of boring filler. So pacing is a big factor for me when considering the enjoyability of Japanese exploitation films. Just something to consider for you. Now, what about DVD availability of this one? It's available on X Videos, which is a porn site, with subtitles. So, I covered this in one of my previous videos. Some of these nasty Japanese and Hong Kong exploitation films can be found on porn sites. Sometimes a simple Google search will just lead you to places that you had never anticipated. Alright, the next film here. Another pretty good one here. Pretty good. And that is Troublesome Night 2, Hong Kong Horror Anthology. But wait, we just reviewed the first Troublesome Night film, which was terrible. Is this second installment, released during the same year no less, really enough of an improvement to warrant a recommendation? Yes, I think it is, actually. So this is an anthology of 3 short films. The first story is about a guy who inadvertently provokes a woman to kill herself. He attempts to redeem himself by helping her family and investigating the motives behind her suicide. This is a good segment, with some creepy visuals and a logical, satisfying ending. I wouldn't even say that it's a quality short film, unbelievably. Given the low quality of the installments of the first entry, this is kind of surprising. Now, the second story is about a few buddies who go on a sailboat and rescue a woman stranded at sea, but end up experiencing strange phenomena. Now, this segment, unfortunately, is not good and could probably be skipped entirely because it has way too much hysterical screaming by the protagonists and not enough creepy stuff. So you're back to it's almost like this series just couldn't really find its consistency, But still, so far in the second installment, you got one good quality entry, one that's just really just not even worth watching. So we're at the rubber match. What is the third segment? What does the third segment bring us? Well, it's about a biker played by Louis Koo who is haunted by a woman in red. Now, Louis Koo has become very popular during the recent decade, so it's great seeing him in this early in his career. I'm actually become a big fan of Louis Koo. He's been in movies like Accident, which was excellent, some of Donnie Yen's films like Flashpoint, a few of Johnny To's films like Drug War. This dude's been in some awesome stuff. Election 2 is another awesome Johnny To movie. So Louis Koo's definitely, he's one of my favorite Hong Kong actors in the present day. So it's cool seeing him this early in his career. Now, this segment has a good start and finish. That's kind of the highlights. The middle section is good, but I think the highlights are the first chunk and the last chunk here. And there's just a certain X factor that makes this entry in this series watchable, even though it's on the shallow side in terms of content. So you have, 2 good segments in this anthology, and the middle one's kind of, not worth watching. And the bright blue lighting that I mentioned earlier in this video, it does make some appearances here, and that's a big positive, and adds a unique otherworldly atmosphere to this. So I recommend Troublesome Night 2. Now, DVD availability on this, it's not widely available, but you can find it on DVD if you search for it, or streaming at various websites. Alright. We're down to the last 2 movies here. 1997. And we got one. The next movie here is a notch above the last few we covered. It's a notch above. It's more of a solid overall film. And it should be no surprise given its pedigree. And I'm talking, of course, about Gakko no Kaidan 3, also known as Haunted School 3, a Japanese horror film. Now, obviously, the first few films in this franchise were solid. I particularly like the second one. And so it's no surprise that this third one's good. Now, in this one, you have Aki Maeda and Naomi Nishida returning in this unrelated third installment, and this time they get leading roles. So some grammar school students and their spunky teacher walk between two paranormal mirrors and get transported to an alternate horrific dimension. So this film by Shuzuke Kaneko expands on the huge variety of horror elements that its predecessors established. There's a mix of CGI and physical effects that are used to craft some creative moments. In fact, at one point there's a demonic copying machine that creates a monster made of sheets of paper. That was pretty cool. A lot of real creative stuff in this franchise. You don't really see some of this stuff. Almost every film has some type of ghost or monster that you really haven't seen anywhere else. Which is one reason why I really like this franchise. This installment is briskly paced, it's creepy, and it focuses a lot on the theme of friendship. And remember, this is a film that focuses on grammar school kids, just like the previous installments. So, again, another little unique aspect here that makes this worth watching. Now, I do think that the finale isn't quite as thrilling as the second installment in the series, but there is a cool scene involving a large skeleton that's worth looking out for. So Gakko no Kaidan 3, I definitely recommend. It's a good flick. Now, I've never been able to find this with subtitles, but, I said it before and I'll say it again. You can watch the films in this franchise without subtitles. Don't be scared to do that, to take the plunge. Now, Gakko no Kaidan 3, just like its predecessors, is widely available on Region 2 Japanese DVD. Without subs. Alright. Alright, we've hit it. We've now reached the best Asian horror film from 1997. And I gotta tell you, it's a very, very special film for me personally. And that's because, are you ready for this now? Prepare yourself. It's my single favorite Japanese movie of all time, regardless of genre. So out of the 2,400 plus Japanese movies that I've seen, I would rank this movie as number one. Now, this is a fairly weird, glacially paced film, and, historically I've been somewhat cautious to recommend it, because I'm not sure if most people would enjoy it. It does have good ratings online, but, I don't know. There's some people that I know that just did not like this. But, in my opinion, this movie's a masterpiece, and I do not use that term often. How many times have I said masterpiece in my video series? Not much. This is one. And I'm talking about Cure, Japanese thriller horror hybrid. Alright. Now, director Kiyoshi Kurosawa perfects the concept of hypnotic villainy in this film, which features a battle of wills between a detective and a drifter who uses the power of suggestion to set into motion a series of killings throughout a city. So basically, this drifter moves from place to place, hypnotizing his victims, who subsequently murder their loved ones or acquaintances for no apparent reason. After these murderers are caught by the cops, they have no memory of the hypnotist at all, which makes this a difficult case to solve for our protagonists. Now, this film moves as slow as molasses in January, but the introduction of the evil hypnotist a mere 8 minutes in sets the seemingly endless array of intriguing moments into motion right from the get-go. So this film showcases some innovative suspense sequences, like stuff that I've never even seen before, plot twists, macabre murders, cat and mouse games, and rich psychological and philosophical concepts. This film will leave perceptive viewers with much to think about after the movie ends. It's a very cerebral, creepy, hypnotic experience. And it also showcases one of the most awesome villains in motion picture history. Now, this hypnotist in this film has a very spellbinding approach. He has like this unorthodox technique that starts off with seemingly trivial dialogue with his victims, but that slowly progresses into an ingenious psychological trap. So a conversation will almost start with like boring, repetitive dialogue with this guy, but then at some point, the dialogue turns creepy in a certain way, and then bam, he takes control of his victim. Really cool stuff to watch this play out, and it happens multiple times in this film. So it provides a number of memorable moments here. My favorite of which is probably the water enchantment of a hospital nurse. That's pretty cool. Also, the identity of this bad guy is crafted as sort of an ambiguous soul personality whose essence is only truly revealed near the end of the film. I love this guy. It's just fantastic. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail because I want to avoid spoilers here, but I am definitely doing a spoiler-filled interpretation video on Cure on my YouTube channel, of course, in the future at some point. But one final thought before we leave here tonight. The last scene in Cure could very well be my favorite ending of all time, but this is a film where you have to pay close attention while watching it. You gotta pay close attention, because if you don't, certain things will fly right over your head, including the ending. You'll miss stuff if you're not paying close attention. So this is a film this isn't a party film that you throw on with a bunch of people. This isn't a film that you should really watch with anyone else. You rent this bad boy, you lock yourself in your living room, no distractions, and you sit there and you focus and you pay attention, because there's a lot of subtle stuff that hits hard in this movie. I think Cure is utterly phenomenal. If you can handle slow-paced psychological films, it's a must-see. So the DVD availability is that it's widely available too, so there's no excuse not to watch it. This film is just fantastic. So that completes 1997. Only a small handful of worthy titles here, but make sure you seek out anything that seemed interesting to you. And be sure to join me in my next video, where we will explore 1998, a very important year for Asian horror. And as always, we'll see you next time.